Did you know that prehistoric humans suffered death and almost went extinct at the hands of the most unexpected and unimaginable predators, who almost led to the end of civilization? Who were these predators, and how did civilization manage to survive such a brutal fate? Thinking about what scared early humans, we usually picture big, fierce animals with claws and sharp teeth hunting across open lands. We imagine cold, fearful nights in caves with only firelight, but even though there were many scary creatures back then, the most dangerous one wasn't a saber-toothed tiger or a cave bear. They were humans like us, nature's deadliest and life-threatening epidemic that man couldn't really control. For most of our time on Earth, we aren't the only human species around. We shared the planet with several human cousins, like Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo floresiensis, as we're still discovering more. But one of these cousins makes us wonder, and not just because of their looks and bones, but because of their capacity for violence, hunger for power, and drive for dominance. That species is Homo heidelbergensis. People often said they were the last common ancestor of modern humans, Neanderthals, and maybe Denisovans. They lived in Europe, Africa, and West Asia between 700,000 and 200,000 years ago, during a time of big climate changes. In these times, Earth saw some of the wildest climate changes ever. In Europe and Asia, Homo heidelbergensis had to deal with glaciers that could destroy everything in their path, and Africa wasn't exempt, as sudden dry spells would dry up rivers and break apart habitats, making everything they needed, as in food, water, and shelter, an impossible challenge. This is where it gets really interesting. The Homo heidelbergensis were the strongest of all human species, having what it took to overpower others. They were fierce and sturdy, with broad shoulders, thick bones, and as tall as we are. Their brains were almost as big as ours, so they weren't just strong, they were smart, lived in groups, and were good with tools. But don't get the wrong idea. These species didn't become dominant in a safe world. They weren't automatically the top predator. However, because of their build, they could survive even the toughest climate challenges that other human species couldn't. They had to fight for their place. Their world was full of animals that could kill them instantly with just their claws, a bite, or even a jump. In Africa, they lived alongside huge old hyenas, saber-toothed cats like Homotherium, and giant African crocodiles that are now gone. Not only that, in Europe they faced Eurasian cave lions, which were bigger than today's lions, and massive short-faced bears that could stand over 10 feet tall and probably kill several people at once with one swipe of their paw. Also, in colder areas, packs of wolves, giant pigs, and even woolly mammoths could be dangerous if they were hurt or trapped. But besides these common dangers, Homo heidelbergensis might have been the biggest and most ruthless threat of all. They could have been the first humans to regularly hunt other humans, and this is not an exaggeration. In many dig sites in Europe and Africa, a particular worrying pattern was discovered: skulls with marks that depicted a vicious attack and deadly blows, bones cleaned of meat, burn marks, and tool marks in regions that suggest they weren't treated with ritual or respect, but were butchered. As more facts came to light, a darker idea emerged. What if Homo heidelbergensis wasn't just surviving, but actually hunted its own kind? This wasn't some end-of-the-world fantasy. These were intelligent, tool-using, fire-making humans who might have seen other groups not just as rivals, but as food. If this is true, then the roots of war, killings, and violence may go way back, even long before societies were formed. Now, this is the spine-tingling question. What if humans have always been their own worst enemy? However, this species of human wasn't the only factor responsible for the near extinction of the human race. There were other factors that existed and could have been seen and referred to as the unknown killer then, and such factors were disease. Scientific studies have shown that some diseases may have existed for a very long time, like cholera, typhoid, leprosy, smallpox, rabies, malaria, pneumonia, tuberculosis, trachoma, and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. These were discovered through things like old bones, DNA tests, and ancient writings. Other life-threatening diseases such as cholera and typhoid thrived and could have easily spread when lots of people lived close together, and also spread through dirty water. Leprosy could have hidden in people's bodies for a long time so that it spread without people knowing. Looking at our genetic construct, specifically mitochondria, and how they're like old bacteria, they survived and evolved through the years. And while scientists have known for a while that these bacteria could have been a deadly killer, its DNA suggested it popped up between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago, probably evolving from Yersinia pseudotuberculosis. Pseudotuberculosis, caused by Yersinia pseudotuberculosis, is a zoonosis that can be transmitted to humans through skin contact with infected animals, contaminated water, or by the consumption of contaminated food or vegetables. For a long time, people thought it just hung around, not causing major trouble until the Middle Ages. However, this idea started to change when researchers kept finding bodies from the Neolithic period with Y. pestis in their teeth and skulls, meaning the bacteria was in their blood and could have likely killed them. As all forms of plague, for example septicemic, bubonic, and pneumonic, are deadly, often killing 93% of those infected without treatment, hence, these ancient people were doomed. Surprisingly, these alarming discoveries didn't shock anyone at first, as infectious diseases were common back then, and other ancient human remains also showed signs of fatal illnesses. People just thought these plague cases were a normal part of ancient life and were nothing too unusual. But then, plagued bodies kept appearing, not just in one place, but across vast distances. Then, researchers started finding them in families and even in mass graves. But what really got people's attention was the timing. All these deaths happened over a relatively short period and around the same time as a mysterious event known as the Neolithic decline. But could that really be the reason behind the population decline? So, what caused the big drop in population during the Neolithic period? Well, some folks think it was a bunch of things all at once, including diseases like the plague. Over time, other theories popped up to give clarity to this mystery. One interesting idea is that widespread intense fear was the main culprit. The era was no stranger to tough times, including mind-boggling levels of violence that were so extreme that they might even be reflected in our DNA. The fear hypothesis suggested that this brutal warfare terrified people so much that they flocked to safer, bigger settlements, leading to overcrowding, which then lowered birth rates and increased death rates, ultimately causing a population crash. Not just that, another long-standing theory was agriculture. While farming initially helped populations boom, it might have hit a rough patch around this time. The Earth's temperatures began to change, and this drastic change began to affect the crops, leading to poor harvests, which ultimately resulted in widespread famine and slowed population growth. Eventually, Heidelbergensis met its match with its own offspring. These descendants turned out to be tougher, smarter, and quicker, and they worked better together. Then, when Homo sapiens left Africa about 60,000 years ago, they mixed with Neanderthals and Denisovans. This led to a rich exchange of genes and culture. Eventually, these interactions and the effect of a changing world helped modern humans take over from the older humans, resulting in the hunter becoming the hunted.